You're listening to the Woman of Value podcast. You are about to hear the story of a woman who is following her dreams and passions and creating positive change in the world.
Your body from the extremities toward the core kind of shuts down. The messages from your brain do not connect with the parts of your body to make it move. So your brain, everything's intact. You know what's going on, but you literally just can't connect with your body. You can't move.
My guest today is Molly Weisgram. She's the author of The Other Side of Us, which is a memoir of trauma, truth, and transformation. It's a beautifully crafted story about a young family that faces the unimaginable, a sudden and traumatic health crisis. It's actually her true story. Within days of a health diagnosis, Molly's husband became a quadriplegic on a ventilator with no promise of a full recovery. Devastating. And when it all seems like everything is lost, they begin the eventual climb back to a new life. The Other Side of Us is Molly's debut book. She lives in Fort Pierre, South Dakota with her husband, Chris, and their 4 kids. She believes life is not about disease, but about recovery. I couldn't agree with you more, Molly. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really looking forward to this.
Me too. So let's start with my first question that I ask everyone. What does woman of value mean to you?
I would have to say, in all honesty, I think every woman has value. And for me specifically, my core value is authenticity. And I think when you can show up as yourself, I think you add tremendous value to everyone around you, the world at large. So to me, it's really being brave enough to be authentic.
Yeah. What does authentic look like to you? I'm just curious.
In practicality, it's really trusting my gut. And gut for me is intuition. It's really knowing that I am fully connected and aware of maybe a deeper connectedness of all people. I think there's a point where it's in life where it's easy to say the easy things and to be the person who can talk about the weather, and nothing about that is wrong. But I think we miss an opportunity when we aren't able to open ourselves a little bit more. And I think that sharing and that connecting in a real honest way maybe brings out the value in everybody.
And I'm sure that was very challenged when you went through the health crisis with your husband. So take us back to that moment and tell us a little bit about what happened and really what you discovered about yourself going through this crisis.
We're a family of 4. We were really at that point in our life, which was 2019, just kind of getting used to the arrival of our 4th baby. So in our minds, we were just working to find balance in all that we do to be our best selves in terms of parenting, to contribute as much as we can at work, to figure out all the things about life at that point in our life. And then all of a sudden, Valentine's Day, 2019, go figure, my husband suddenly has kind of some strange tingling in his hands and feet and is, no big deal, but I think I should go to the doctor. And that set us into a completely different route in life that we could not have imagined. He was diagnosed with Guillain-Barré syndrome, which is a rare autoimmune disorder. It affects the peripheral nervous system. Essentially, there's nothing genetic about it. There's nothing that makes sense about it. It's literally, you might get a little virus or bacteria, no big deal, commonplace, and your body decides to attack itself rather than the virus or bacteria. So essentially, there's varying severities, but your body from the extremities toward the core kind of shuts down. The messages from your brain do not connect with the parts of your body to make it move. So your brain, everything's intact. You know what's going on, but you literally just can't connect with your body. You can't move. It's not I don't know if anything about it is usual, but to have a severe case like my husband did, and we didn't know it was severe right away. It was just, we were he was put on a plane. We went to the tertiary care center 3.5 hours away from our home, and we kind of just waited. And within 5 days, he was ventilated. He was, we thought, completely paralyzed. I thought you were completely paralyzed when you couldn't move your body, but turns out weeks later, then he couldn't blink his eyes either. So he was literally a frozen statue. And surprisingly, when the eyes don't blink, your muscles don't work in your eyelids. Rather than having your eyes closed, your eyes are actually frozen wide open. So it was frightening in every single way.
Yikes.
Yeah. So when we found out it was a severe case, and we had been anticipating, maybe a short stint in rehab for physical, just getting back to life. When we figured out that it was a severe case, really all they could tell us was he might be like this for weeks, months, years. It's just hard to know. It's really about how your body reacts, and it tends to have a rebound that you do. Your nervous system can regenerate, but you just kind of wait. And waiting, I don't know anybody who loves waiting, especially when your kids are at home and you should be tucking them in and supporting them through normal things. Eventually, my husband was transferred down to a amazing inpatient rehabilitation hospital in Lincoln, Nebraska, called Madonna. And he was ventilated for the next 15 weeks. His mom ended up going, we were in the hospital with him for the first 6. Then when he was transferred, his mom went down with him, and I had to take care of our kids. We'd been sleeping on the floor of a hospital for 6 weeks, and my babies were at home, luckily, with my parents. But it was difficult. It was quite literally the together but separate thing. We were going through the same illness, different effects for both of us and for all of us involved. He started having like a slow motion miracle recovery where he really did bounce back. It took 9 months. And so he was away from home, really with his full-time job of just literally trying to move every little muscle at a time. And he had a tracheostomy, a gastrointestinal tube, and slowly but surely he got to shed all of those things. So it was just an incredibly odd, bizarre illness where, I could tell stories of the odd ways we had to communicate because he couldn't speak, the phantom sensations he would describe, because when your nervous system is damaged like that, you literally have a very bizarre experience with your body. He had explained his head in a cage balancing with his torso balancing on top, and he is completely lucid. And he's with it, but he's like, this is what I'm going through right now. And it's a very interesting time to try to be a support and advocate and try to understand and put yourself in those shoes. It was difficult. So I know that's a long explanation, and there's certainly more, but that's the gist of a very difficult health scenario that our family really took on for all of 2019.
Wow. And then the pandemic hit.
Yeah. Just in time, my husband got home just in time for the pandemic to hit.
When people complain about like rainy weather, right?
Right. Yeah. Exactly. But it is all perspective, because I learned a lot through that experience, and I'm thankful for the amazing recovery. But learned way more than I ever thought possible.
So I can't even imagine how scary it must have been to see this healthy man completely become paralyzed, couldn't even move his eyelids, like couldn't communicate, was completely dependent on tubes to breathe, to do everything in his life, and then eventually coming out of it. Mm-hmm. So, you seem like a really strong woman. Like you seem like you've got it together. You know how to kind of show up and get things done and be in that survival mode. Is that,
Mhm.
do you just kind of go
Um,
into boom, triage, I got it?
I think you learn how you are in those situations when you're in them. Like
Mhm.
I couldn't have imagined for sure. I do believe how you do one thing is how you do most everything else. Um, but yeah, I found myself, had somebody once explain to me that they're like, well, I kind of, if I was on Lost or something, I guess I'd kind of want you to be my leader, which was actually quite a compliment. But yeah, I think you tend to lean on the things that you're good at. And I guess I probably separated from my emotions to some degree to manage, like actually do the things I had to do. So I put those away for another day. And I went to what I could control. And it was from every little odd thing that I decided I needed to, do weird paperwork, but like at least I was able to do something. And then I would start to go, okay, we have no idea how this is going to go. And I want to start understanding the different route. I mean, how I did it was, we know we're going home. I want to understand like the biggest risks, but if there's an opportunity to go home and that's what we think is going to hope to happen, that we won't lose him. Home is our destination. So I want to pull out that roadmap of life. I want to put all the life map, and I want to start looking at possible routes. And I want to understand what those mean, because I need to understand how to ask good questions. And so for me, it was very much of, I I'm a bit of a risk manager, to be honest. I can't help it. That's sort of and so I wanted to understand all of the bad things that could happen. I didn't want it sugar-coated. I really did want to know, so that I fully was aware of what situation we were in. And honestly, because I wanted to, no matter what we did, I wanted to set that can-do attitude. I wanted to know that, okay, this is what I'm going to have to do in order to make that work. I want to say I'm pleasantly surprised or proud of myself for how I walked that. It wasn't easy. It wasn't pretty. And, and I didn't always do everything right. For instance, when it first happened, I just wanted to assume he was going to get better. So I didn't really call home very much. I didn't want to talk about how horrible it was to my kids. I didn't want to talk, and it was horrible. I didn't do everything right. And my kids still remind me every once in a while, because we've done a lot of talking and processing and counseling around it, that, you should have talked to us. And I'm like, I should have shown you that more respect. I wanted to I didn't want you to have that experience in your life. I was hoping we could kind of pass it by and could save you. But yeah.
You said a lot of things that I want to highlight. You learned who you are in a crisis. So there were some skills that you had internally that showed up.
Yep.
You had to leave your emotions behind in order to get things done. And I think one of the hardest things when you're going through crisis is to get back to your emotions at some point.
Oh, I agree with
right?
that completely. Yeah. Oh my gosh. Yes. Thank you. Because not everybody understands. And I don't have a lot of other people really quite understand that, it feels like. So I could talk a lot more about that one, and I don't want to interrupt you sorry about that.
Yeah, no, I would love to come back to that, because that to me is a point of curiosity. I know for me, when I was going through the crisis with my firstborn son, I just went into get it done mode, and the focus on what you can control, because there's so much you can't, makes you feel like at least you're not going to completely fall apart, right?
Yep.
So it's an important thing. And I love that you called it risk management, because it is. It's like you've got to be in charge, or things won't get done. And you're the best advocate he has.
Yep.
And so learning as much as you can, doing the research, those are all things you can control. What you can't control is the timing and how he's going to recover, and is he going to fully recover, and what's going to happen. So, and preparing yourself for all the bad things that could happen. I just got my second vaccine for COVID, and I was telling my mom, I'm going to take off the day tomorrow because I don't know how I'll be. I could be fine. But I also wanted to do the research on what are all the bad things that could happen that I need to prepare for. So I know, do I need to take Motrin? Do I need to make sure that I don't have a lot of clients or interviews or whatever? And my mother said, oh, you'll be fine. And that's the way we numb ourselves, oh, you're going to be fine. And what if I'm not? And I want to be prepared for that, not because I'm a pessimist, but because when you know, you can be prepared. So I get that. I get the preparation and what can I control?
Yeah.
Separating from your emotions is a way to be in survival mode. And that's the most important thing. You were in triage, you had to get things done. And of course, you're not sharing everything with your kids. That makes perfect sense to me. Why would you share all that? They don't need to know every single thing. But I also understand from a child's point of view, my parents didn't share certain things with me about some big stuff that I felt for a long time, like they didn't trust me that I could handle things. And so it's finding that balance.
Yeah.
But you had no experience with any of this. Like, of course, you're just trying to figure it out and live another day.
Right.
So let's go back to after separating your emotions. What was the impact of that? And how did you get back to, and are you able now to connect to your emotions? Like that might be a scary place for you. I don't know.
Yeah. It obviously, when you said that so resonated because it's still a challenge. I mean, we're only 2 years out from diagnosis. And I might've been a little bit that way before, and so, you're not a clean slate before you start something like that. I perked up just because it's so hard to explain. And for me, I found what happened was in managing what would start to happen is I would find like myself furious about certain things. And it was, I refused to feel sad. Don't seek out, I avoid at all costs. And I had before this kind of that victim mentality. I'm not that. I mean, I'm adamant because I just learned over my life that it's not helpful. And in fact, you're putting a picture frame on your life that is so not complimentary and it weakens you. So I was already kind of in that mind. I did find myself and my friends talk about it, just being kind of like not kind of numb, maybe, even to those who interacted with me. Like, I can't believe she's not like, but I almost felt unavailable, I think, to them. And then when I would maybe experience a twinge of sadness or just extreme disappointment, or I was overwhelmed or, whatever, like a rush of feeling, I would squelch it with anger. I would be, and not that I was overtly angry. It was, I really engaged in counseling. And that was a way for me to be as healthy as I could be, because I didn't really know how anxiety, for instance, would set into your body. I didn't even think about it. To be honest, when I was scared, I was sick because I started to feel like I was having strangling hands on my neck and I couldn't breathe. And I mean, it was weeks. It was starting to really concern me, like, oh no, I'm ingratiated in this hospital world. And then I'm like, oh my gosh, I probably am. What if I'm sick? And then who's going to take care of the kids? And it was like snowball. So I knew that once I had gone into my general practitioner and visited about that. And it was, she was wonderful and thorough, but she said, this is really suspiciously like anxiety. It would make a lot of sense, Molly. It's like, oh yeah, I suppose you're right. And so counseling was really my avenue. And I love that profession. I love everything about it. I find it to be an amazing opportunity where that person holds space for you and you get to explore those feelings that you don't really want to bring out in real life, like anger. Anger at seemingly silly things, like anger at my boundaries being blurred necessarily. And people were so wonderful. But just suddenly being so on display in a way. and then missing your spouse, missing your other, like who you had become for, I can't remember if we've been married now 16 or 17 years, but long enough to not remember exactly how long we've been married. Just having to do it all. I don't know. So anyway, I bring up this anger because I think it's a really natural defense, and how I learned that going right to anger and so often, and just like in my body, just being like, and kind of shoving it down. It was effective because it pushed everything down, but it became way harder to access the other stuff. And so where am I today with that? I think my counselor's still a little proud of me when I can squeeze out a tear, but to be honest with you, because I think it's so important to reconnect, because I think that when you don't, I think you unfortunately you feel more numbed on the sad side of the spectrum, but I think you feel more numbed on the joy side of the spectrum too. I know right now, for instance, I cannot relax. Like I can't even, sometimes think the thought of having fun sounds exhausting. Like it's just, I'm still, I mean, I am admittedly still kind of in recovery. Mm-hmm. And the book I recently wrote was a huge part of my process. I mean, it was in a lot of ways a lifesaver, opportunity to reconnect with my spouse, who, the other surprising thing is when the spouse suddenly comes back and it's so wonderful and you're kind of disconnected from your feelings, it's hard to feel the joy of him being back. You're so grateful, but it's hard to, like, I should be just on cloud nine, like no worries, there's nothing. And that was certainly, it was much harder for me to maybe just have a nice, smooth landing. But the book really helped share perspective. And that's what I needed with my spouse.
I can imagine how you needed to go through a catharsis when and a lot of people don't realize this, and I don't think it's just about going through a major crisis. I think any trauma that people go through, and it can be a small trauma, it can be a big T trauma, but you tend to put up guards, and armor yourself so you can deal with it. And I think anyone who's gone through anything can relate to that, because I think most of us have trouble accessing our feelings. When we can put gates around them, we don't have to get hurt. And we also can experience complete joy. Mm-hmm. And if you don't face your emotions, they get stuck inside you, like you were finding. It was stuck in your body. I had panic attacks when I was at the end of my marriage because I had been stuffing for so long. I couldn't sleep. I was going crazy. Like I really felt like I was going crazy. Mm-hmm. Like I was almost outside my body looking down at me going, who is this person? I don't even know who you are anymore. Mm-hmm. So it takes its toll. And if we don't work on it, if we don't access who we really are and find our voice, which I want to talk to you about, it has a lot to do with tapping into your feelings and both ends of the spectrum. You can't just do one without the other.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's true. It is. I think it is one of the deepest truths that I learned in this process, especially on this side of the illness and back to now recovery or integration back into normal or whatever we want to choose normal to be.
So let's talk a little bit about finding your voice. And was it the book that helped? Was it the illness and speaking up? Like, tell us the process of finding your voice.
Well, I think the requirement for advocacy. I mean, my husband literally couldn't speak, and luckily we were in tune enough and tended to be on the same like wavelength enough that at least at the beginning I felt like, okay, I know what I need to say and do. Again, once he started with having really, drug induced experience, I mean, you could just tell he wasn't with us all the time, and odd, bizarre sensations in his body. It was harder to be a voice for someone. But advocacy, I think that's the part where I had to step up and not just be the person who kind of cowered in the corner of the hospital room. I needed to understand, because I really did feel that I was going to be, I knew there was times where I was going to be called upon to make decisions, whatever those were. And I wanted to make a really educated one. And then you also know continuity of care when you're in a really acute situation, and it's acute for not just a day or an hour or a week. I mean, acute for weeks. I mean, the first, we were in 3 health facilities. The first one was for 6 weeks, acute the entire time. When we were transferred, acute for at least the first couple of weeks there. It was just like an elongated trauma. And so advocacy was critical, because that continuity of care is, you don't kind of have that bridge as people. I am thankful for the system, the healthcare system. This is not me pounding on the healthcare system, but there are flaws when this happens, because anyway, I found that advocacy was critical. And I would say how I've explained it is, it was almost like I cleared my voice through advocacy. I had to raise it. I had to step into maybe inappropriate, but I stepped into the circle in the ICU where the physician rounded and the 10 people were around him. And I took my place right next to the physician, and I listened and I clarified, and I answered questions when they were wrong, or it didn't come, because they're all looking for that is whether, I don't know if it was appropriate for me to do that, to be honest with you. But I felt called to do it. And I felt honestly respected by the physicians for having again, that's not why I did it, but for creating a powerful voice and being a part of this scenario. It wasn't until, though, I had to start narrating our life for kind of everybody else. And I say that, like, people who loved us, people who, Chris had a small business at the time, and his clients, my parents were taking care of the kids, my work, our friends, when we live in a small community, and especially when you live in a small community, everybody knows everyone to a degree. So it's something that people are always asking. So the narrating for us started, and I resisted it hugely. I talked about how I don't like I don't want to step into a victim role. I could not figure out how to narrate without somehow sounding like a victim, because it was a pretty yucky situation, and I didn't, it was sort of happening to us. So how do I do this in an authentic way where I don't feel like I'm giving away? I don't want to be the poor you kind of person. I just don't, and neither did Chris. So when we were pushed, I don't know if you're familiar with Caring Bridge, but Caring Bridge, yeah. So it's a health website where you can share your healthcare journey. I had a preconceived notion that was just kind of a prelude to death, and I was not really ready for that. And so I really resisted it. I was like, I don't think that's a good idea. But the number of texts that come in because people care, the number of people who are asking, family members who are then siphoning up to you. But for me, it was, my parents had our 4 babies, and one who was still, I was still nursing. I was pumping in a gross hospital bathroom. When people are asking them, and they're just doing their best to hold it together for us back at the home front, I knew I needed to have a place where they could point to and say, oh yeah, check that out. So I don't have to answer. Honestly, again, I didn't really call home. So they just were literally in the dark. That Caring Bridge experience was, I really, like I said, it wasn't looking forward to that, but I have to say it was sort of a life jacket. For me, it was sort of like every 2 week, I would put down the reality of what was happening, as well as sort of my processed insights or learning from that part of the experience. But the comments and things, like, I didn't really want to talk to people, but when I had a minute to look at it and see people giving me sort of this lift, this, like, we care, keep going kind of thing, it really was helpful. And then I would find myself going back and rereading my own things, rereading and being like, is that what's happening? Okay, that's it. Yes. Okay. That's what's happening. I can do, like on to the next. And also Guillain-Barré is so bizarre and exhausting because there's so many things. It was exhausting waiting because we were tending to him constantly, from taping his eyelids closed to he would get hot and then cold in 5 seconds because his autonomic system was all wacky. It was nice to see the trajectory of the experience from the long view versus the emotional middle. I realized in the writing of it is that I wasn't writing about just a health journey. I was writing about perspective and wholeness. I was writing about the things I was grateful for and that like deep truths. It became like such a, for me, sort of this like deeper thing. It kind of awakened something in me. So when Chris came home finally, I actually wanted to keep writing because it had been such a outlet for me. But in truth, I wanted to write about how we could make something really great out of our second chance together. Something, I just didn't know a lot of people who'd gone through that kind of experience, that tough of a situation. Actually, at the end of that, have the same people in the story living. So I kind of felt like I need to make good with this. This is an amazing opportunity. And my perspective is different now. What are we going to do with this? How can I want so much to make this second chance one of deep and intended, like I want intention. I want to make this as meaningful and true and authentic as possible. And what I found was that I wasn't ready for that story. I was ready. It's a good idea. And I hope someday to write that. And I think it's just as important to first to look within and be with yourself. And I found that I needed to sort through what had just happened. I talk about being disconnected to your feelings. Like I was still stuck in the first 6 weeks. It echoed in my mind constantly. I have a terrible memory, to be honest with you. I could remember walking down the hallway. I could remember the sounds. I could remember that icy hot feeling that would come over my body. I would, it's natural trauma stuff probably, but I had to get it out of my body and put it somewhere else. And I kind of describe it as like it trickled out of me through my fingers and onto that screen. And then I could look at it again with a different perspective, maybe one where I didn't still have to feel it completely, but one where I could start to handle it in a I don't know, a more controlled way. And in the process of doing that, I just strengthened my writing. And so it became my friend. I'd say the first half of it is kind of not really journalistic, but it's describing what happened. I put my ICU journal out there. It's pretty intimate. And the second half is much more about the feeling side of things, that count the explorations and counseling and and I felt like I strengthened over that time. But I'm doing things right now, first of all, writing the book and that experience behind the screen that felt so true. And now exerting myself because the writer writes, the author provides the writing. And so I'm doing things like podcasts and like sharing on social and offering my words to those who are interested, who might find their own healing in it, who, at the end of the day, it's not really my business of what it does for folks. If it does something for them, I'm grateful to have the opportunity to share like I said, a pretty vulnerable and intimate way. So when I say finding voice, it's being brave. It's projecting myself in a way that I wouldn't have at all before. I always found the irony in Chris and my relationship is that Chris is the outgoing one. He's the face of our family. And when he couldn't do that, I was. And so I had to try something on that we had, a different way of being. And I don't remember the quote exactly, the Marianne Williamson quote about, quit hiding your light. You need to step into your power. And to me, I've talked about authenticity as being a core value. I think I'm getting to do that. I get to do that with my words. I'm not tailoring them to what I think people want to hear. This is my experience. And so I'm getting to authentically share and do things that are bigger than I thought was maybe possible from myself. And maybe that's just a courage thing, but it's funny. I wouldn't say I would ever want this to happen, or if I wouldn't look forward to doing it again. I'll say that, but I am grateful for the fruit of suffering.
Well, it's what you made of it, and I think that when you have the ability to mine a crisis and find the value in it,
mm-hmm.
It helps you and it helps others. And I have to say that while you're telling your story, I found myself so many times. I was also the shy, quiet one. My husband he's a comedian. He was a performer, and he could not handle my son's illness. And so it all came down to me. And I think that the courage to stand up to doctors, again, I could relate to that because I had no medical background. I didn't know anything about this disease. It was rare. It was just like yours, like the occurrence of what happened. It was so rare that I felt it was my duty to educate them and also to trust my intuition. Like you said earlier, the intuition piece is so strong, and it really does connect you to your authenticity, to your truth.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And when you can find it, however you do, I mean, it certainly would be great if we could all find it through lovely, pleasant things.
Yes, it would be. Doesn't always work like that.
No, it doesn't. Mm-hmm. But our pain is often the avenue to discovering our truth. And I think that if you can find your values through your pain, you are so much better off than the people who do become victims and shut
mm-hmm.
down and feel like, why me? That was very much my husband's point of view, by the way. What did I do wrong to deserve this? And I'm like, maybe nothing. Like, but we have a sick son, and who cares why it happened? The fact is, it happened. And it's like what you do in those moments makes or breaks you. And I wouldn't be a life coach today if I hadn't gone through that. I'm positive that I wouldn't have cared about people's voices. I never would have had a podcast either. I mean, I was the person who hid behind a camera and never expressed my voice. So I totally get it. And you realize that by sharing your stories, the more vulnerable you are, the more someone can find themselves. Like, I didn't go through your exact experience, but I'm resonating through so much of what you share because you're sharing so honestly and openly and about the same kinds of experience that have had. And I know that so many people listening to this will find themselves, whether it's a spouse, or it doesn't even have to be illness. It could be something else. It could be another crisis where they were able to find their values through the crisis, through the pain.
Your comment about it's what you make of it, it's your perspective. I was really lucky. Chris and I, my husband and I both were really lucky to have some incredible mentors in our life, and had really taught us about, and we'd gone through class. I mean, we'd had some training jointly, classes on just the power of your mind, the power of your thoughts, what you plant into your mind is a seed and it grows. And so be careful of that. And at the beginning, and I had honestly forgotten this, and it might've helped that I knew we had a good after the doctor left, diagnosed us, he walked out, and we had a good prognosis. Guillain-Barré is traumatic and it is horrible. And the thing is, your nervous system does have a recovery. I mean, it's maybe not a full recovery, but you're not necessarily thinking this person's going to die. So that all is caveat. He told us what was happening. We're going to be life flighted off to another place. And the physician left, and I sat down and I kind of braced myself. I looked at him and my husband, and I said, this is going to be the best thing that ever happened to us. I don't know why or how. And I didn't know it was going to be that severe. So easy for me to say, but he said, and I'm just so grateful. It was one of my happier moments. I mean, one of my better moments. And that's why I say how you do one thing is how you do everything. And it's nice to exercise that muscle before in a way that's not so traumatic, so that when it's a traumatic situation, you can be there too. He said that think about laying there for months on end and not even be able to communicate. And then your eyes are taped shut and you literally can't, you're alone and you're on like pain meds. So you're like maybe in a dream world, but it's scary. And he said he always, and I'm just so thankful that I said this. I always remember this. We're going to be the best people we can be because of this. Mm. And you know what? We are. That's the bizarre thing, that it kind of is, it's what you make of it. And again, easy for me to say, we had a really good recovery, and yet that's true. We are able to be more of who we are authentically because we were refined through the situation.
And you realize that life is not to be taken for granted, and health is not to be taken for granted. There's so many things that come to light when you go through a crisis. Yeah. And I think people I remember when I moved into a new neighborhood and having gone through crisis, like I just don't stress about the small things at all. And I don't think I ever really did, but it just definitely made me much more aware, like most of those things are totally ridiculous and not to be focused on. And I was meeting so many people who would get derailed by a rainy day, like, oh my God, I have to take my kid and put them in the car seat during the rain. And I told my husband he needed to come home from work so I could do it. And I was like, what? Get a clue. Like, this is rain. This is really not a life crisis.
No biggie.
Yeah. But on the other hand, and I just want to touch on this lightly, there are people who, when you're going through crisis, are afraid to share regular things with you, like, oh, I can't share that my kid had a cold because you're going through this terrible thing. Did you experience that? And if so, what did you do about it?
I have to say, everyone in my life, I can't even tell you how they stepped up for us. And I'm probably one of the people who's probably has been kind of scared of that, like that person in grief who's trying to cope, because I want to say the right thing. I was, that I think that's the thing. They just want to say the right thing. And so I would say I couldn't believe how people, I honestly don't remember what people said, but they showed up. They showed up for us. I do remember being in conversations where, because I would want to try to I was trying to make a normal situation for the kids. I was trying to, so I'd be visiting with friends and it would feel normal, especially, it'd feel normal to them, especially because, I'm making the situation comfortable. And so, it'd be like, they'd maybe talking about a vacation they want to plan or whatever. And we were in no planning mode. And so it's just little things where I could then see that they would pull back. So my experience was, I wouldn't say that wasn't part of my experience, but in my memory, it's more about like, oh, yep, we are definitely in a different place. Like how when you are in the place of you can't make plans in some odd way. Like, I know I didn't think about the random stuff, like the vacations, or should I change my decorations over here? Like, I just didn't really, none of that mattered. And so it was, I was very free to be with my kids in that moment. I was so available to them once I was home and able to, and I was very in tune with their thinking. So I know I'm kind of going off the subject, but it is interesting because I think it's difficult for folks to know what to say, especially when it's a bizarre, rare thing that I mostly remember people just showing up. I don't remember what they said.
Yeah, the showing up, those are the things that stuck out for me, like the woman who came and sent her cleaning person over to clean my house, or the
Mhm.
people who came and held my son so that I could get some rest. It's sort of thinking for me because I couldn't think for myself for a long
Yeah.
time.
Yeah.
It's the kindness in people. And, there was somebody who constantly would bring over food. Every Friday, she would bring over like a bag of food.
Mhm.
I think that in general, like I just want to say that I appreciate when people actually give you three ideas and then say, which one do you want? Instead of just not doing anything or doing the wrong thing.
Right.
It's important to really just ask. If you don't know what to say, you don't have to say the right thing. There's no handbook for this where I mean, probably there is at this point, but but it's but it is hard to know. We don't have these experiences until we do. And everybody needs something else. Like you may have needed more childcare than house cleaning care or mental health day, or somebody to say, hey, let me take you to get your nails done. It's then or you would have hated that. Like, right. It's
right.
somebody
It's so
checking
personalized.
in. It is so personal. And I think that anybody who has gone through a crisis and thinks they know how everybody goes through something is needs to just to get curious with the person and say, what is it for you? How can I be there for you?
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think for us to be able to say, hey, I'm going through a hard time, I could really use this support too. I think it's hard for people to ask for help.
Oh, it's terribly hard.
Yeah.
And that's, I don't know. I grew up in South Dakota. That's, it's a small state where everybody, I mean, not everybody knows each other, but there's a lot of connections. And so there's just I think it's maybe easier for people from a word of mouth perspective to be like, oh yeah, no, she told so-and-so this would be really helpful for her. And so all of a sudden you have that, and that was one of those times where I couldn't appreciate more my community, because having everyone being as accessible as they are, which can be a good and a bad thing, right? But it was so beautiful. I mean, I honestly, I talk about my book as being a love story, not a romantic love story, but it is a love story because of the way people showed up for us, our families, our friends. It was just beautiful.
Yeah. All right. Well, we're going to go to the lightning round. Are you ready?
Okay. I think so.
Okay. Kind of pivot from this deep conversation. So the first question is a fill in the blank. I used to think I wasn't blank enough.
Good enough.
What was the number one thing holding you back from becoming a woman of value?
Fear.
What's the best advice you can give to a woman who wants to become more empowered?
Listen to your silence.
Ooh, I like that. Got goosebumps on that one. What advice would you give to your younger self?
This is literally what I thought. You look good, girlfriend. just put your head up.
Oh my God. We just are so hard on ourselves. What is something that people often get wrong about you?
I think it's maybe being labeled shy versus what I actually am is just, I really want a deep connection. So I think I just reserve for those opportunities.
How would you like to be remembered? This is the final question.
Honestly, as long as my kids remember me in a way that they know their perfection, that I'm someone who holds that space, that knows their perfection. Honestly, that's what I want. That's the memory that is important to me.
I used to think I wasn't good enough comes full circle.
You
want your kids to know they're good enough, that they don't have to suffer with all this self-doubt. I love that. Well, Molly, how can people find you?
Facebook and Instagram at Molly Weisgram. And I also have a website, mollyweisgram.com.
Great. And this will all be in the show notes, along with your Instagram, your Twitter, your Facebook, your website, a link to your book.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for coming on the show and showing us that how important it is to find your voice, to be courageous in your life, not to be a victim, but to also connect with your emotions and be fully expressed in all ways, not just be in this survival mode, but what you do with crisis really matters.
Thank you. I've so enjoyed our visit. I really appreciate this opportunity.
If you would like to step more fully into your value, grab a free copy of The Ultimate Guide to Becoming a Woman of Value on my website, thewomanofvalue.com. Just click the link at the top of the homepage. And if you haven't already done so, be sure to click the subscribe button in your listening app. And if there's something in this episode that inspired you, please share it with others, because the more we share these inspirational stories, the more women of value we will have in this world. I'll see you next time.